originally we weren't sure last month, because the survey only closed a few days ago, what we would have to update here, but we've had the lovely Fiona be able to support us in bringing the data and the information from the survey together. So Fiona's going to go through the slides to share the findings back with you, and then Alice and I will kind of open up for discussion. And just as a bit of a reminder, the summit, this survey was based on the feedback from the timeline that people produced in the second summit, and it was looking at the 18-month priorities of part of the work plan. And the aim of the summit was to think this is a whole system approach and a whole sector approach. It wasn't just about one sector. So I'll pass over to you, Fiona, if that's all right.
Yeah, no problem. So morning, everyone. I'm going to be presenting back the data. I've got a couple of screens going on, so if you do have a question, just suggest that you speak up, because I won't be able to see all the hands at once. So just to give you kind of broad information about who filled the survey in, so we had 61 responses, and you can see there we have a range of geographic areas and a range of sectors. We've grouped together people with lived experience, VCSE in the third sector, because a lot of people who said that they had lived experience of ADHD, autism or other neurodiversity also ticked that they were in the VCSE or third sector. Where we had people who are working for statutory services and also ticked that they have lived experience, there was 4 of them and they were divided up evenly. So after having done that, we have this sort of 60-40 split between people working in statutory services and people with lived experience or in the VCSE or third sector. When it came to analysing the priorities, so this was the bit where you had to rank. There were 14 priorities in this kind of 18 months resulting from the summit, and you had to rank those as either urgent, important, moderate or low priority. And so what I've done is assigned a score of 4, 3, 2, 1 to each of those respectively. But if I just took those scores, then what would happen is basically the more people who've responded would drive that conversation. And so what I then did to those scores was to weight them. So this is something that basically rebalances the score so that it's not just informed by whichever group has the most people in it. So what we've done is taken it from that 60-40 to then 50-50, people with lived experience, VCSE, third sector, statutory services. And that's given us this overall result in terms of priorities. And I will go through this in a bit more detail for each of them. But at the top here, we've got working together on a cross-sector approach to early support and reasonable adjustments based on need rather than diagnosis, consistency in screening and triage for assessment, and then exploring digital solutions to how to make the assessment pathway process more efficient. So those are the top 3 when I scored it like this. The bottom 2, and in fact 3, were around workforce, and the bottom 2 on regional and then local peer support staff networks. As well as looking at the overall score, I also ranked by urgency. So again, this is a weighted priority, but just filtered to just the ones where just the urgent responses. And although this has changed the order of the top 3, it's not actually changed the top 3. So you can see that it's still that consistency in screening and triage, digital solutions for efficiency, and cross-sector approaches to solutions based on need, not diagnosis. And again, down the bottom, we have peer support for staff. So taking those top 3 in a bit more detail. So this first one on offering early support and reasonable adjustments based on need, not diagnosis. And so using the unweighted percentages, 82% of respondents considered this an urgent or important priority. And there wasn't very much variation by sector, you can see there. So this is the lived experience VCSE or third sector, and then this is statutory services. 75% of respondents thought this work should be done once at West Yorkshire level rather than locally and at place. The next one, so this consistency in screening and triage, 74% of respondents considered this urgent or important. There was quite a marked difference between people with lived experience or working in the VCSE or third sector and people working in statutory services. So we can see that there's a total of 84% considering that this is urgent or important in lived experience or VCSE, plays sort of 66% in statutory services. So what I've done is I've gone back and had a look. So we did ask people to give us a reason why they'd ranked priorities low. And what I've done is I've gone back and linked where people put something as a low priority and then gave us a response as to why. Shelley and I have themed those responses and I've provided a bit more information on that. So where people ranked number 7, this priority, as low, 3 people said that it's because this wasn't the biggest challenge. 2 said it was because places were too different. There's too much variance at place to do this consistency and triage and screening. And 1 said that it wasn't the right time to work on this. Moving on to our final in the top 3 is exploring how digital solutions could make the assessment pathway process more efficient. 67% of people thought that this was urgent or important. There's a little difference between sectors, but not massive. And 92% of respondents thought we should do this at West Yorkshire. So something that pretty much everybody can agree we should do once rather than locally. Again, I pulled out where people voted for this as a low priority. 3 said it was because it wasn't the biggest challenge, and then 1 each said that these digital solutions were not researched and validated, that it wasn't the right time, and that, again, there was too much variance at place to have consistency. So those were the top 3. If we move now to the bottom 2, so number 10, which kind of scored the lowest in that weighted priority setting, 40% of respondents considered this urgent or important. Slight difference by sector, but where people told us why they'd ranked this low, they said most said that it wasn't the biggest challenge faced. 2 agreed and said this should be place-based. 1 said it should be done at West Yorkshire, so they'd ranked this local peer support as low. And 1 said that doing it locally would cause too much variation. And we get a similar sort of response in terms of a West Yorkshire regional peer support staff network. So again, fewer people considering this urgent or important, and when asked why, saying this wasn't the biggest challenge to face. And I do want to kind of reiterate that there isn't, although we're saying this is ranked lower, it's quite interesting that there's not that much variation between all the priorities, which does suggest that we have got the right ones and that people do consider these things useful and important to be working on. There's 1 more that I want to draw out, and that is priority 6. So this is creating and using a standardised referral form for autism and ADHD assessments in West Yorkshire. So this was the one where the kind of difference between people with lived experience or working in the VCSE and third sector versus statutory services differed the most. So 84% considered this urgent or important, and over half of people with lived experience or working in the VCSE and third sector considered this an urgent priority for our system. Whereas if we look at statutory services, only just over 11% considered this urgent and 33% urgent and important. And when we look at why people have ranked this as a low priority, 9 said that it wasn't the biggest challenge faced, which was the most common response for all of the answers, to say we've got other stuff to worry about. But 7 people thought that there was too much place variance, so the places were too different to work on this. Which was an answer that we've already seen in the responses, but this was the biggest one that we got. This is so for the reasons where people said that places varied too much, this was the one where people said that the most. So I've talked a little bit about this already, but just to draw it out, for the vast majority of things, apart from neurodiversity champions and peer support groups, people wanted this to be done once rather than 5 times and locally, except in 12, so neurodiversity champions, people with lived experience thought this, and working in the VCSE and third sector, thought this should be done at West Yorkshire rather than place. Finally, 18 people left us additional comments. So this was a free text box at the end. And again, Shelley and I have themed these. So when we're talking about support, so nearly a third of people left us comments about additional support. So this was disordered eating, self-harm, burnout and suicide are all lots of areas where support is needed for neurodivergent people, whether they're diagnosed or not. Comments asking for more support in schools and in the voluntary and third sector. Four people commented on wait times, which they said should still be a priority to be addressed, and that support based on needs should be offered whilst waiting, not seen as an assessment or support. Comment on pathways being differentiated, and also the need to address workforce capacity and upskilling. 3 people gave us comments on assessment diagnosis, so one asking whether there was a light assessment option people could use to access reasonable adjustments in work or education. Somebody commenting on the lack of consistency, so postcode lottery, right to choose and shared care creating inequalities. And one asked whether digitising diagnostic testing could provide more accuracy or consistency. 3 people commented on planning and stages. So this was sort of a meta commentary on this piece of work. So how do we align local and West Yorkshire plans and capacity? And as we progress through this work, what do we need to think about doing once versus 5 times? And then finally, 3 people offered us personal reflections. So to conclude, and then I will pass over to Shelley, the top 3 priorities are working together to offer early support and reasonable adjustments based on need, and followed by exploring consistency in screening and triage, and then digital solutions to make assessment pathway more efficient. Where we did ask people, they considered that these 3 should be done at West Yorkshire rather than at Place. There was an agreement that although peer support staff groups are important, they are a lower priority than others on this list and should be done at Place. And there is variation between sectors with regards to standardising screening and triage in autism and or ADHD assessment pathways, and particularly variation on standardising referral forms. I will stop talking and let Sherry take it from here. Happy to take any questions on the analysis.